Okay, part two. I have my data here. I'm going to turn it into a pivot table. I highlight all my data, making sure I have my labels at the top highlighted as well. If I were in a PC, I would go into the Insert ribbon. In a Mac, I go to the Data ribbon, and there will be a little pivot table button. I just click that. It opens up a new tab. I'm going to rename this my pivot table, just so I don't lose it. I'm going to get rid of the stuff it automatically puts in there. And what I want just to do, say I'm going to look at what are my total scores like. Well, I put the sum of, well, I put my total down into my sum values. This is kind of my money window down over here. But I don't want the sum, I want the average total score. And so if I click on, let me show you that again, if I click on this little question marker I, in a PC it would be a little black downward pointing arrow. I can switch it to average, click OK, and now I have my average score. If I want this to not have 8 billion decimals, I can right click on it, and there will be, and it'll be a little bit different in a PC, but there will be a format cells option. If I click on that and then I select number, I will be able to set how many decimal places I want things to go to. I'm going to keep it at 2. And now it's much easier to read. Okay, so I see that, right, overall, students did okay on this. Average score of about 80%. The questions I might have, though, are about how they did on the individual objectives, right? Because it's not just about what people succeeded at, it's also, you know, what they kind of failed at. And if I select my objective averages that I created, and I change them all to averages rather than sums. This will just take a minute here. I can see that, right, across all my averages, or all my objectives, people did pretty well on the first one, not as well on the second, third, or fourth, and they're pretty good on the last one again. Right? Now suppose I want to go even deeper into one of these objectives. Well, I can do the same thing by looking at, well, I can actually, I'll just unclick them here. I will look at, say I'm looking at objective 1, I want to look at each one of those items that went with objective 1. Again, it defaults to sum. I have to change it to average. I wish there was a way that I knew of, and I've tried to find it before, haven't been successful, of setting it to default as average. And I see that, well, it was pretty good, really good on the first one. Second one wasn't as good. Third one was even a little less good. I may have set it up that way that in each section of the exam, the first question was the easiest, and they got progressively more difficult, so that would make sense there. Let's take a look at, say, objective. We'll look at these 5, because that'll give us something fun to look at. Items 11 through 15. So I'm going to highlight those. Again, I have to set the stat to average rather than sum. And I can get an idea of how people did. Now, I can also go ahead and highlight this stuff and add a chart. I can either do it in the pivot tables, or I can go to charts in a Mac. It would be under insert in a PC, and then there would be little chart options. I'll just click on the column one, and here I have how well people did on each one of these objectives. And if you look at it, right, I expect it to get less as we go forward. But in this case, you know, item number 2, even though if I arrange them in order of difficulty, should not have been that hard, people didn't do well on it. So this would be an indicator that I should go back and relook at whatever that represents. And maybe it's a problem with the item. Maybe I taught something in a way that everyone has a misconception. Or maybe there's some other weird issue, like it was there were some typos or something, right? So I have to figure out what's going on. Now, once I make a graph, anything I do will automatically be integrated in this graph. Because suppose that, right, as I was saying earlier on, a couple ways to look at data. One is to start, from the broad view of how do people do overall, then to break it down by my objectives, and then to look into the objectives. I can also add filters to say I was wondering if things were different for boys or girls. I can put gender into the row. I can extend, oops, well, it's not letting me. Well, there we go. I can extend, come on, there we go. There we go. I can extend the highlighted area down to cover both females and males. And now I can see that, well, in general, there is maybe a slight difference between the two. But it's nothing gigantic. When I'm looking at the actual numbers, right, females did a lot worse on this item number 2 than the males did. And I might wonder why that might be. It could just be just randomness, right? It was a weird question. Something obviously was wrong with it. But they did the same here and here. As we look at the other ones, males did a little bit better on item 4. Females did a little better on item 5. So I don't really think there's any systematic issue with my exams. If I wanted to look at, say, the difference between my mainstream and my ELL students, right? Well, my reds are my ELL students, my blues are my mainstream. And as you can see, right, for the first objectives, for 1 and 3, there were really no difference. For item 2, which is a weird item anyway, none of the ELL students got it right. That might tell me something, maybe it doesn't, depends on what the issue is. When I get to the more difficult questions in the section, though, I see a marked drop in how successful my instruction was for those ELL students. Now, it might just be that, language issues in general are holding them back. It might be that I assumed that they had some basic language skills that they did not. And that would again be something that I have to look into more closely. The last one I want to demonstrate is looking at GPA. Now, suppose I'm looking at, and I'm just going to highlight everything again, get rid of this thing. Suppose I'm looking at a whole bunch of different values. Well, the graph that I get kind of stinks because it doesn't tell me anything. It just is too much information. And the reason is because I have all these different values for people's GPA. Now, I can put people into groups, though, by right-clicking on the top cell, and I will get this group option. If I click on group, it gives me the option of where I want to start, where I want to end, and how many groups I want to make. So suppose I want to just split it into 3 groups, people from 1 to 2.0 grade average, 2.0 to 3.0, and 3.0 to 4.0. So I'm going to change it by 1. So I'm going from 1 to 4 by 1s. I click OK, and now it has made the data much easier to digest. And if I look at it, right, I can now do a comparison for my different groups. And this is a lot easier for most people to look at and understand, and even for yourself, than trying to fudge through a bunch of numbers. Everyone did equal again on 1 and 3. Hard to say what's going on here because that question is screwy. But of course, I expect my 3 to 4 people to do better than everyone else. But an interesting thing is that, right, the 1 and 2 and 2 to 3, they're all kind of equal here. The 2 to 3.0 grade point averages did better at the most difficult question in this section. And I could change this to look at all the different objectives rather than items themselves. So if I go back down to my objectives, I will again have to change it to averages, which is a real pain. But, the benefits of using something like this far outweigh costs of having to go, take 10 seconds and do that, going through that menu. And if I look again, I expect again my better students to be doing better in each one. I expect my middle students to be in the middle, and I expect my lower students to be doing the worst. And I see that, and I might be interested in looking at, overall, were my lessons equally successful for each different group? Or were there some objectives where I was more successful? Or were some where I just didn't reach one group at all? I mean, suppose that my low students were all way down here in Objective 5. Now, if doing well on 5 depended on 1 through 4, that would make sense. But if it's kind of an independent thing, I would really have to ask myself, well, why aren't my lower performing students doing well here? Now, if I find an area where everyone does poorly, an objective where everyone kind of fails, I would really have to look at my pacing, the instructional examples I gave, really try to figure out what was going on. But looking at this data this way gives me a clue as to what's really going on, and then I can take steps from that to do the next thing, which is modify my plans, modify my materials, my examples, my techniques, my strategies, and so on. But I'm using the data that I have to make my instruction better. So basically that's how I want you to go through this stuff and think about it. Your task will be to use sample data 2, and there will be a quiz on D2L where I will be asking you questions about the patterns that you find. Was there a difference between the ELL and mainstream students? Were there differences between my CD or ED people? Were there gender biases and so on? This lesson has 3 main objectives: defining author's purpose, identifying author's purpose, a level 2 goal. So basically they're looking at 3 different author's purposes: entertaining, persuading, and informing. The second goal then is students will have to read a bunch of stuff and figure out whether it is entertaining, informing, or persuading. And then the final one is that students need to write. Now, up here, the first 3 go with Objective 1, the second 3 go with Objective 2, the third set go with Objective 3. I'd like you to get the goal or objective or task averages, and then get total overall scores just like we did in the last example, and then make a pivot table and play around with it, and you'll be asked to answer some questions and so on to make sure that you got the right solution. So that's it. Look to D2L for that quiz.